He's an ice cube.
Two California teenagers have defrosted a million-year-old caveman. Now they're going to wash him, feed him, and teach him to be normal.
That's boring, dude. Normal. We're going psycho with him, bro.
And Encino High is about to learn the truth.
He's a caveman.
Encino Man.
That's barbaric.
Rated PG. Now playing at a theater.
Hey everybody, Brian the Brain here, and I'm your host for this month. And here at Pantheon Plus, we are celebrating Brendan Fraser's Oscar win by looking at 4 of his movies from the 90s. And boy, I mean, I thought Encino Man was going to be a cool way to start this off, but maybe I was totally wrong about that. But yeah, it's Brendan Fraser in the 90s month, and we're celebrating his Oscar win here at Pantheon Plus. And my co-host for the next couple of weeks is Jerome Cuson here at Jerome C 1985 on Twitter. And you know, we appreciate if you leave a 4 or 5 star review for us. That helps with the algorithm and people find our show. And you know, if you want to give us feedback, you know, you can do that as well. And you know, this week is kind of like I don't know, it was kind of frustrating because I thought this would be fun, but it wasn't as fun as I thought it would be, and it's kind of unfortunate. But Brendan Fraser literally saves this movie from being like one of the worst movies of all time. But yeah, Encino Man, 1992, released right after the LA riots. Jerome, can you believe it?
Not exactly the way that I would want to get out of the LA riots. You can make your own tasteless Coke about which you would prefer, but all I'm going to say is, Brian, this was not a good start to Brendan Fraser month, and I definitely have some opinions. You would think that in a movie with Pauly Shore, that Pauly Shore would be the person that is most annoying to me. I could safely say, in this case, that is not true.
Yeah, Pauly Shore was actually respectable in this, which is crazy, but the reason we picked this, obviously, is because Ki Hu Kwan has like a cameo role in this movie as well, so that was kind of cool to see. So, obviously, based on both their Oscar wins, we chose this because, I mean, they made fun of it at the Oscars. So, yeah, I mean, let's kind of get into the history of the movie, though, because this was like a Hollywood Pictures movie. Now, if you're not familiar with Hollywood Pictures, I think we mentioned them a couple times before. It's a Disney-owned side, you know, company that produces either, you know, PG-13, you know, R-rated movies that don't really fit the Disney bill. You know, Hollywood Pictures is known for producing, I believe, Pulp Fiction. Is that correct? I mean, that's kind of like the big one from the 90s, right?
I would say so. Yeah, I think we talked about Hollywood Pictures. I forget what movie it was, but it's pretty funny to think that Disney, I believe, has the ownership of this film. It is not on Disney Plus. Obviously, it is not on Hulu. I had to purchase this for rent, which I'm extremely bitter about. So yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah, this is a movie I've definitely heard of. I definitely had never seen this before. I've seen a couple Pauly Shore movies, but not this one. I think Son-in-Law is one of them. We did talk about, you know, Pauly Shore had a cameo in a Goofy movie. So it's pretty wild to think that we have now discussed multiple Pauly Shore movies.
Yeah, who would have thunk it? But in this case, I mean, it was just timing because the Oscars and everything going on. So, but a little background to this movie. Encino Man was directed by Les Mayfield. This was kind of his theatrical debut. He was kind of known for behind the scenes kind of stuff. Like if you've seen any like behind the scenes documentaries about like any big 80s action budgeted movie or whatever, it's probably him. And I don't know. I guess Disney was like, we need a director. We have this idea. We're going to pick him because he's a seasoned veteran, and they kind of went with it. And they filmed it between December 91 to February 92, and this was released in May. So obviously, with this movie has like no special effects. It's all like dialogue and just stupid jokes. So they just, you know, released it really super quick. You know, it's really interesting, you know, because with the timing of the LA riots, I just found it so fascinating that this takes place in the San Fernando Valley, Encino, quote unquote. But, you know, the LA riots is mainly affected in, you know, the downtown LA areas. And it's just such a contrast, you know what I mean? Kind of looking at this, you know, this middle class family, and this movie releases weeks after the LA riots, which is, you know, a struggle with, you know, the lower classes and race and all that kind of thing going on. So it's just kind of this weird contrast I'd noticed last night because I was looking at the timeline and I was like, holy shit, this was like right when the riots happened. So just weird timing, you know what I mean? And they're kind of ignoring any social economic issue problems in this movie, obviously, because it's a Disney produced movie, but I thought that was just kind of fascinating. And then looking at where they filmed this movie, it's you're gonna be shocked, Jerome, because this was filmed at 7532 Sedgwick Court, the main house where they find the ice block and everything, and they film the pool party, and that's where Sean Astin's family lives. I'm not going to reveal where I live, but that is 2.5 miles behind me, Jerome. I can go visit that house right now, take a picture, and send it to you. And I never knew that. I thought this was like filmed in Porter Ranch or something, but holy shit. Sedgwick Avenue, I know exactly where that is. Because I was like, one of the scenes they filmed as well, I was like, I think that's Valley Circle Boulevard. And it probably was, but the way it looks. So, Jerome, I'm living next to a famous house. What do you think?
It's pretty crazy. I definitely got that California feeling throughout. Lots of sunshine, just the designs of the houses. I've seen enough movies at this point to kind of recognize when we're in California, and you definitely, if you watch this, get those vibes. One of the other things I want to point out is this is a movie that cost $7 million, made $40 million, and we are not in a place where that typically happens now. Everything has to be $100 million or more, and you're constantly chasing that $1 billion number. And it's weird that we're at this place where these studios feel like, okay, we have to do bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're trying to get to this magical $1 billion. When studios, this is what studios used to do. They would make these goofy, mostly terrible, some less terrible, but you would get like your SNL movies, a lot of your SNL movies, like your Wayne's Worlds, your Superstars, your Dirty Works, like they would cost $7 to $8 million, maybe $10 million. They would make a solid $30 to $40 million, and then they would go on home video and they would kill in the rental circuit and the buying circuit. And I think that's kind of how Kevin Smith got his career going too. Kevin Smith never made a ton of money, but his movies always were cheap, came in on time, reliably made $20 to $30 million. So is this movie good? It is not. Is it profitable? Probably. I mean, for a movie to make $40 million now is nothing, but when you're on a $7 million budget, like this movie probably made the studio a tiny profit. And it's just sad that the studios are just so obsessed with chasing these big numbers that they're missing out on these smaller numbers and still missing out on potentially profitable films.
Yeah, I would say the example of that in 2022 is Terrifier 2, and I'm not the biggest modern horror fan, so to speak, but I did hear the rumblings of Terrifier 2, and if you look at that number, I mean, it was a budget of 1 or 2 million, and they made 10 or 11, and for them, that was like a big win. So, and they take a lot of that, because I think a lot of that was self-invested too. So, numbers like that can work. I mean, small budget movies can work. It's just how you work them. And this was a case where they were aiming for that teen audience, that kind of like, because I mean, basically what I've, looked up in the research is that, based on the success of Wayne's World, there was this teen audience that they could tap into, that Disney realized they could tap into, and which is why they did the casting in which they did it. So Sean Astin didn't want to make the movie because he read the script and called it the biggest piece of shit he'd read in his life. And that's probably true. And yet he was still pursued, and they offered him $150,000 plus $400,000 on the back end, which is nuts for a small budget movie like this, kind of. But then, they kept pushing and he said no. And then they're like, oh, we got Brendan Fraser on board. We got Pauly Shore on board. And, he had never heard of Pauly Shore before. He looked him up on MTV and he was like, oh boy. And then they upped his pay to another $100,000. So his pay up front would be $250,000. And he was just like, all right, fuck it. I mean, at that point, I feel like you just got to say fuck it and take the money. You know what I mean? It's like they're so desperate to want you for this particular role, and you're not doing much like a Sean Astin would be in like 1991. So it's like, yeah, why not take the money? And then Pauly Shore was known for Totally Pauly on MTV, which ties into what the Disney executives wanted for that teen kind of audience to go see this movie. Because obviously, if this was, for kids, this would be under the Disney banner, but it's Hollywood Pictures. Therefore, they're leaning towards that high school teen type audience that Wayne's World got. And it worked because, I mean, you just talked about the numbers now. 40 million worldwide, still for a $7 million budget. That's, a bunch. Plus, we know the rentals at the time were doing well because I rented the movie when I was 5 years old and watched it. So clearly they got me on board and hooked me because I remember this movie a lot. And I have more fond memories of the movie when I was a child, but of course watching it now, it's pretty terrible other than Brendan Fraser. But yeah, just the way this movie was put together was just, even with the negative reviews, you know what I mean? It still had, the legs to make the profit. So, credit to Disney, man, because it's something like this that kind of like, I would say something like this would inspire like a Disney exec to say, okay, let's do an Angels in the Outfield. And then you get something like an Angels in the Outfield eventually in 1994. So it's not like a bad thing that some of these bad movies get the profits that they get, because it could lead to other movies, being more deserving, like an Angels in the Outfield, which I think totally happened in some ways. And then, of course, you got the cameos of Ki Hu Kwan. Him and Sean Astin had been on screen together since the Goonies, so that was really cool. But, at the time when I was 5 years old, I hadn't seen the Goonies yet. So this was kind of like just new, fresh territory for me. So, and then years later, especially with the rumblings of Ki Hu Kwan coming back and then getting the Oscar nomination, it was pretty crazy to see that, they were together in this movie along with Brendan Fraser. And then, of course, they talked about it on the press tour. Brendan Fraser and Q Kwan being on many press tours together. And then, of course, Jimmy Kimmel joked at the Oscars that two actors from Encino Man are nominated for Oscars. What an incredible night it must be for the two of you, and what a very difficult night for Pauly Shore. Maybe it's time to reboot Biodome. Let's never reboot Biodome. That's a movie that, again, when I watched as a kid, I was like, this is fun. And then years later, it's like, this is trash. And it's not necessarily Pauly Shore's fault. I think he's just typecast. But even in this movie, I think Pauly Shore actually is fine. But getting into the plot mechanics right off the bat, I would say that the Dave Morgan character is very problematic, and a lot of male tendencies that are not going to fly today, and it's very creepy at times.
I don't know what else to say about Dave that hasn't probably been said a million times before, but I can say, coming into this podcast, I was very curious to see, okay, we've got Pauly Shore, who's probably going to be really bad. We've got Sean Astin, who I like. Sean Astin. I think he's done a lot of really good stuff, coming off of Lord of the Rings, Stranger Things. He was in the Goonies. This is kind of an awkward period for him. And it just doesn't, like, the character is really bad. And I could see Sean. I'm glad that Sean Astin read the script and was like, okay, this is really terrible. The only thing that is disappointing to me is that he did not hold out for more money, because he probably should have held out for at least another 250 grand. Because this is the kind of movie, if he made this today, he would not only be canceled, his career would probably be over. And he is extremely lucky that this was a different era. He's extremely lucky that even though this movie made $40 million, probably a lot of people didn't see it. And yeah, he's really lucky that he has a career after this, because this is bad. Dave Morgan is a terrible character. I don't think Sean Astin is very good. I don't totally blame him for him being bad, because I don't think there is anything redeemable about the Dave character. I find the idea of him digging a pool in his backyard to be utterly absurd right from the get-go. I think we are set up for a bad start. The way that he interacts with Robin, the way he interacts with all of he's just a terrible person. There was definitely, my breaking point was when he brought a nude, the picture of he and Robin nude in the bathtub from when they were young. And I was like, okay, this is the creepiest thing that I have ever seen. Dave is a terrible person, and this poor girl needs to run away from her as quickly as humanly possible.
Yeah, he doesn't even win her over until the last minute of the movie, which is bizarre. It's very, very bizarre. So let's kind of open it up. Before all that, actually, it's actually an earthquake in the first ice age, and Brendan Fraser's in there with his, I don't know, cave wife or whatever, and the ice comes down, and like, again, I mentioned the earthquakes in some previous episodes before, and I was alive and experienced the 1994 Northridge earthquake, and I was 5 years old at the time, but watching this movie, I still didn't know what an earthquake was when it happened. So I watched this movie at 5 years old, and the earthquakes are just going way over my head. I don't even know what the fuck is going on, probably. Because, it's just so weird that they're not making fun, but like just kind of poking fun of the fact that, LA is known for its earthquakes or whatever. And then, let's have an earthquake in LA because it's LA. And then boom, the 94 earthquake kicks. And I feel like these jokes about the earthquakes in LA just kind of went, oh, we can't do that anymore. There was a real tragedy that happened in the San Fernando Valley. Because I feel like it's kind of been like this trope in like late 80s, early 90s movies where there's got to be a random earthquake in an LA setting, right? And I know that's you've seen that in movies before. But I think after the 94 earthquake, they were just like, let's be done with it because it was a tragedy and I experienced it. So it's just very weird to see these earthquakes in 92. You know what I mean? And then we got the big one in 94 and I felt like maybe they were just knowing that there was this big one coming because the big one happened in San Francisco in '89 during the World Series, that famous game that was postponed. So it's just so weird that they got these earthquakes going on here. So um, and then we moved to the modern day, and then he finds him in the pool, digging this pool, and just I don't know. You would think the ice would have melted, right? But who knows? It's Disney science, folks. So they got this, Iceman in the back, and they dig him up, and he's trying to tell his parents that they found this thing, and of course the mom's completely ignoring him because that's what you do in a movie like this. The parents are just going to completely ignore the teens and what they're doing and what's going on with them. And they said, and they put him in the garage, and they decide to thaw him out. So they thaw him out while they're at school, and then he comes out and he's running amok. And this is probably my favorite part of the movie, where he's discovering things and like he's drinking water from like the the curve and like go from the drain or whatever, and then just the wild stuff, and trying to start a fire in his room and interacting with the dog and just shit like that, and him interacting with the mailman. Like, I can't help but laugh at Brendan Fraser in this, and considering that Brendan Fraser went from School Ties, and he probably was really, I mean, he was really hesitant to take this role. Like, they pushed for him to take it because they felt like he was the perfect kind of guy to fit that role because he's like 6'3", and like, yeah, it was just ridiculous. But I find these scenes really funny, despite it being stupid. But it's probably because there's no Sean Astin in most of these scenes that he's kind of just discovering things. But I mean, Jerome, you couldn't help but laugh at these, right?
I think Brendan Fraser is easily the best part of this movie, and I think part of the reason that this movie is so bad is that at times it feels like Sean Astin, Brendan Fraser, and Pauly Shore are in three different movies. They're on three different wavelengths. I think with Pauly Shore and Brendan Fraser, it's just them. I think the movie becomes a lot better because they seem to get themselves on the same wavelength. And I think that's part of why it works so well. And in some ways, I think if the movie had been about those two, I think it would have worked out so much better. I really don't think that Sean Astin belongs in this movie in some ways, because I think you have this character because like he is supposed to be like, he is a nerd, but he's like going after this girl. And as an audience member, you're supposed to be rooting for him to kind of get with this girl. But the problem is along the way, he's just so terrible to everyone. He's terrible to her. Like, he's clearly just using Brendan Fraser to get what he wants and doesn't actually care about. I mean, that, like, hypothetically, if this were real, and my God, this could never happen. But if we look at Link, if he were to come around, like, legitimately, like, was alive 10,000 years ago, and is all of a sudden just in the 1990s or the 2000s or whatever. I mean, it's a traumatic experience for someone. And this is a comedy, so we're not going to go and approach the tragic levels of this. I think if this movie were made today, I think they actually would be more willing to work with that. But I think for me, Dave is just such an asshole to Link that it makes me think about just the tragic elements all the more. Like, if Dave was actually nice to him, then maybe I wouldn't be thinking of that as consciously. But it's a really weird thing. And I do want to say, as bad as Sean Astin is, Richard Mazer, who plays Larry Morgan, he plays Sean Astin's dad. If you want to watch somebody sleepwalk through a performance and absolutely collect a paycheck, watch Richard Mazer in this movie. He is so bad and so bored. It comes all the way around to being entertaining.
I don't think he's bad. I think he's just bored, mostly bored, because he had, I don't know, 2 scenes, and he just filmed it at the time, so I don't know. It was just a random casting, too, because he's a good background player. He's in The Thing, for crying out loud. So, Just random casting there. Again, there's more random casting as well because this is the film debut of Rose McGowan. She plays a student in the background, and she's just randomly there at different times of the movie. So, again, with the weird casting in this movie, and then you mentioned the tragic parts of his character, the Brendan Fraser Link character. I mean, at one point they do go to the Natural History Museum and then see that display thing, and he starts freaking out, and that probably was the one scene that they were like, okay, we'll give you some kind of like tragic background or some kind of like traumatic, PTSD or whatever, but you're only gonna get one scene to do it, so there you go. And then they gave him the Natural History Museum scene. So, because in that scene, Brendan Fraser was crying, and I was like, oh shit, you're trying way too hard for this movie, man. But I mean, for the kind of actor he is, he felt like that was the thing to do, and he did it, and it actually. That is one of the more memorable scenes in the movie because that's the moment you probably, as an audience, sympathize with Link at that moment, and then you kind of become more attached to him. And that's kind of the point of it. But the problem is you got the Dave character just kind of doing all these shitty things. You know what I mean? You mentioned the picture. You mentioned him trying to just obsessively wedge his way into like his Robin's relationship with the other guy, and it's just ridiculous. You know what I mean? But they're trying to play on that '80s trope of the nerd trying to get the girl or whatever. But in this case, it just comes off creepy, especially with the picture, and then the way he treats Link, and especially even Pauly Shore's character too, because it feels like he just takes him for granted. So that kind of sucks. But I would say that Pauly Shore's character Stoney is actually the one who's doing or has the most sense in this movie. He's actually saying things that are like making sense. Like, bro, what are you doing, Dave? Like, he's actually the conscious of Dave, I would say, in this movie. But once they get invited to this hockey rink, and at the hockey rink they get beat up by Robin's boyfriend, and basically, Link doesn't know how to fight, I guess, because he was just a hunter gatherer and he only knows how to like defend and not fight offensively. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. And then they teach him to fight Jerome, and here we go with the old school wrestling footage in this movie. A VHS tape labeled Wrestling Classics. And what is the match that they show? They show Dino Bravo squashing a jobber and doing an airplane spin, and classic wrestling.
I mean, classic. You could put that in quotes. This entire thing was absurd because then they have a martial arts scene next, and boy, oh boy, if you were to teach somebody how to fight, this is absolutely in no way how you would actually do it. It's just, there's a way to make it funny. Like if he actually maybe used the tactics later on, which I don't think he really does. So if there's a payoff to it, or like if this was a WWE produced movie, then I think it could be like a nice wink. But this is really bad. I mean, Dino Bravo of all people is not the person that you want to learn from in terms of being able to defend yourself. I don't know. There's not a lot of wrestlers from the WWF of that era that you'd probably be able to learn anything from. You probably have to go to like New Japan and All Japan and look at some of those folks. But yeah, this was pretty bad. Again, this is a movie. If this were a superhero movie, this would be borderline pile of shame worthy. Brendan Fraser and Pauly Shore probably saved this from not being that, but this is genuinely an embarrassing scene, I would say.
Oh yeah, and watching as a kid, I was just blown away every time because Dino Bravo was like not the most over guy, and Dino Bravo would actually die a year later, getting murdered, for that whole Canadian mafia thing with the cigarettes. So
yeah,
it's just crazy.
We don't want to talk about that too much because Rick Martel did it in a shoot interview, and then he had to disappear for a while. So yeah, we don't need to disappear for a while. Let's just leave it at that. Dino Bravo's dead.
Yeah, this is not Dark Side of the Ring. This is definitely not Dark Side of the Ring, but just a strange occurrence, I think. But so they, from there, the next day I think is the driver's ed scene, and Link's trying to drive, and I don't even know why they left him alone, let alone have him in like driver's ed, because like there's a point where you cut and you see Pauly Shore and Sean Astin together in the same class, and I'm like, shouldn't one of them be with Link right now? And I guess they just kind of go over that plot hole. And then all of a sudden Link's driving, and then he's driving with like two wheels, which is impossible. Yet they somehow pulled it. I don't know how they pulled it off because this was a practical effect. So I guess that's the only like cool practical effect of the movie. But Because it's not like the front wheels or the back. It's literally like the side on the right, those two wheels, and it's just they had to have had some mechanism holding it up on the other side that the camera couldn't see. You know what I mean? And I think they ended up in Reseda, which is crazy because with the PWG and everything, but it looks like Reseda is what I want to say, but it may not be. But they stop at a bar, right? Because that's what you do when you steal the driver's ed car. And then, you just go to a bar right in the middle of the school day. So they go to a bar. Pauly Shore's drinking with some people. And, this is where we kind of have this recurring thing of Link liking to dance, which I think is a fun way to kind of like explore the character. And, because for a caveman to just discover music for the first time, I think he would dance, to be honest. So that actually does have like some fun sense to it. And they kind of do pay it off at the end with like all the dancing at the end and the prom and everything. So that was fine. But then it gets stupid again with the gangsters and the cholos and like getting drunk, and then Link just touching women without permission. Just so weird, so weird. Don't do that, people. He does that multiple times in this movie, and it's very uncomfortable when he does it. But he does it in the bar, and then the cops come. I guess they arrest those two for some reason for being underage in a bar or something, even though Link is 10,000 years old. There's a lot of logic that goes out the window in the third act. More so, I think they just kind of give up because at this point, it feels like the writers were just like, we have no idea how to end this movie, so let's just fucking end it. So they do the whole prom thing, and like of course Dave wants to go to prom with Robin. Robin says no. She breaks up with her boyfriend, and Robin's like, I want to go with Link. And of course, Dave's like, no, and so fucking jealous and playing the jealous type and just, toxic masculinity, and tries to get rid of Link. And this is where I think they filmed on Valley Circle Boulevard because I've seen that road before and it looks very similar to that road. And I think it's the same road the way it looked 30 years ago. So, and he tries to get rid of him like a fucking dog. I couldn't help but think of I think they did this in Lassie, I think, but oh man, it's just brutal because they're treating him like a pet at this point, and it's just fucking like weird feeling about that one. But Pauly Shore, finds him and is like, "What are you doing, man? You can't just abandon him just because he wants to go to prom because Robin wants to go to prom with him. That makes you look like a dick." He didn't say it in those words, but essentially that's what he was kind of saying. And of course, Brendan Fraser comes up to him and says, "Family," and gives him the hug and does the whole Vin Diesel thing. And then they cut to prom, and then of course the ex-boyfriend of Robin finds out that, hey, this dude's a caveman, and he tries to explain to the prom people that he's a caveman, and everyone just laughs because they think it's kind of this 90s way of saying he's cool. This guy's a caveman! And everyone's like, yeah! So that did work, and of course, if you have a guy telling, a bunch of people at the prom that this dude's a caveman and not a foreign student, they're going to look at you crazy, and that's what ended up happening, and of course, Brendan Fraser does the airplane spin on the cake, and that's it for the bad guy, the bully boyfriend guy, and everyone goes has a party at the pool, and that's it, and that's the ending of the movie.
And I just want to point out that the bully was pretty bad too. Like, these bully characters are pretty obnoxious anyway, but at the very least, get somebody charismatic to do the role, or get like a get somebody in there who is either looks intimidating or is charismatic enough to pull it off. They did neither in this case. And I just wanted the bully to get beat up, and not like we talk about the idea of X-Pac or Go Away Heat. I thought Pauly Shore would have X-Pac Go Away Heat. As it turns out, it was both the bully and Sean Astin.
Who would have thunk it? Who would have thunk it? And that bully was actually the guy in the crew of Wayne's World. They're film crew. I don't think he has one line in the movie actually in Wayne's World, but he's sitting in the back when they're doing the Bohemian Rhapsody spot. So that's where they kind of casted him from. And then, he ended up talking in this one, and it didn't really pan out. But that's the movie. And then, of course, Brendan Fraser's cave wife is also, I guess they didn't find her. I think she just kind of just randomly just unthawed herself, and then the whole process again. And then, yeah, and it turns out that's Sonya Blade from Mortal Kombat Annihilation. So, yeah, we're never going to review that one. But, that's the end of this one, but I thought this was going to be better. I swear to God, but I guess it was just Brendan Fraser's goofiness in the beginning, and then his caveman ways that kind of carries the movie, and then you kind of forget about Sean Astin's shitty character, and Pauly Shore actually is pretty decent in this, I gotta say, and I would say the strengths of this movie is probably the fashion. I would say because I think the I mean, look, they look like they're from '92. You know what I mean? And Pauly Shore.
I will say, in terms of a time capsule, this movie feels very much a sign of the times. This feels like a perfect capsule of the 1990s in terms of the fashion, in terms of the execution of this movie. So if you want to know what does a low budget comedy from 1992 look like, that is exactly what you are going to get here. Something that is very representative of this kind of movie. Look, I would not recommend this. I think you could certainly go in a lot of other directions and find something better. One of the movies that the movie we're talking about next week will hopefully take us in a better direction in terms of these low budget 1990s comedies. But yeah, if you are looking for a soundtrack and a clothing style that is authentic to this time period, then this is your movie.
Yeah, because the soundtrack's got like Queen and then some other cool tracks. I think this is the first time I heard "I'm Too Sexy," like the first time I ever heard the song, and so that song has kind of been remade actually lately in another rap song. So that's kind of got a legacy to its own right. But yeah, I would say that the costume designer did a really good job. And from the notes I'm reading, Marie France, she pretty much had to do a custom job on Brendan Fraser because he's so tall that the stuff they originally got him didn't fit. So they pretty much had to like go with it. And Pauly Shore, his character in this movie has a really unique style of his own. I couldn't help but think of Clueless because in Clueless I feel like that's a really good movie as well, and it's got this awesome sense of '90s style fashion that I feel like is the peak of the 1990s, and it's in Clueless. And I feel like you got a little bit of this in this as well. So those are almost like the only positive qualities. And of course, Brendan Fraser's performance, because I mean, without him, this movie would have just utterly been shit. You know what I mean? But he's just so into the role. You know what I mean? And you can't help but just smile whenever he does stupid shit like that on camera. So that's kind of my take on it. It's kind of like a 5 out of 10 for me. I'm probably being way too generous, but that's kind of my final rating on that. And yeah, I mean, obviously the weaknesses is like the script, Sean Astin, just terrible character writing and terrible character arcs, and some people just sleepwalking for a paycheck.
Yeah, I'm going to give this a 3 out of 10. As I mentioned, this is a borderline pile of shame movie for me. If it wasn't for Brendan Fraser, boy, oh boy, I could see even giving this a 2 out of 10. So look, you are really like, my goal for June and July was to give MVP awards to the screenwriters of all the movies, because I think it is a tribute to what's been going on with the WGA strike. But this week, Brian, you're really pushing it. I'm still going to give it to George Zaloom and Sean Sheps, who are the listed screenwriters. But all I could say is, Brian, don't ever put me in this position again.
Listen, man, I thought this was going to be better. I had rose-colored glasses apparently on this movie. It had Q Kwan in it. This movie introduced me to 7-Eleven and all the awesome fast, junk food that 7-Eleven can provide. This is the first time I saw Slurpee. So there's a lot nostalgic-wise for this movie going on, even with the earthquakes. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So my MVP is going to be Brendan Fraser. You're sticking with the writers. Best performance, hands down, Brendan Fraser. I mean, he's the only not great, but good performance in this movie. Pauly Shore is not annoying, surprisingly. So I gotta give him credit for that, because in some movies I've seen, he gets over the top annoying, like Biodome. But this, he seems like under control and actually like caring. And yeah, I mean, surprisingly decent for Pauly Shore.
Yeah, Pauly Shore was not terrible. Best performance is easily Brendan Fraser. I think if we were to just really focus on his performance, we could probably have just done that, quite honestly. But we're here to talk about the whole movie. This was a good outing for him, and I think this is what Brendan Fraser is kind of known for in the 90s, is taking these piss poor roles and bringing something to them. I think he's almost somebody that is underrated in that way. I think he is somebody who doesn't get the credit he deserves for being a good actor, because I think just who he is as a persona was much more like this himbo, very tall, good-looking dude. But I don't think they ever gave him they didn't give him a lot of good roles, and that's one of the reasons I'm excited to talk about Gods and Monsters, because I think that is an exception to this rule. But this week, we're talking about him as a caveman. He was George of the Jungle. He played kind of a stupid idiot in The Scout, a movie that we are not reviewing because I vetoed that. And yeah, I mean, it's remarkable, just the roles, and even The Mummy to an extent. Like, this is just what he was known for. I'm really hoping next week is better. So what's on tap?
Okay, so Airheads from 1994. I have mentioned this a couple times. This has got a great cast. Steve Buscemi, Adam Sandler, Chris Farley as a cop, Ernie Hudson, Michael McKean, Harold Ramis, Judd Nelson. The list goes on and on. Joe Mantegna. Joe Mantegna. He's the fucking the DJ. So I forgot he was in this too. But I mean, this movie is just something else because it starts out like so small, and then the scale grows and grows with a mass crowd outside. You got a little bit of like a Dog Day Afternoon, meets 1994, grunge rock. It's fucking great. I love this movie a lot. I saw it a lot on TV growing up in the 90s. And then, of course, with the DVD age, I've rented it a bunch of times. Airheads is great, directed by Michael Lehman. I think you might actually be proud to give credit to the writing on this one next week, Jerome, because I think this is like one of those under the radar, even today, underrated comedies. Like, some people don't even consider this like an Adam Sandler movie just because he's not in the lead, but Adam Sandler is very much a prominent role in this movie. Plus, he's got that tie to Steve Buscemi, which would go on to future Adam Sandler movies as well. So there's a lot going on there, and I'm really excited for it. So, Jerome, I know you were kind of hesitant this week, but I hope Airheads next week is a lot better for you, right?
Even if Airheads is bad, I am at least curious to see what it looks like, because this is kind of Adam Sandler before he developed his persona. So I'm always fascinated to see what that looks like. And I think that will give us a lot to talk about. The Steve Buscemi aspect of things, Brendan Fraser being in it. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. Even if the movie isn't good, I feel like next week there's going to be a little bit more meat on the bone in terms of talking about the different performances and whatnot. And it's pretty crazy that I have never seen this movie before, even though, like, it is Adam Sandler. This is a pretty famous movie, I would say. So would this be a cult classic?
Yeah, because the box office is shit. So we'll talk about that as well next week. But it is definitely a cult classic because this was one of those movies that TV and DVD helped spread the word on it. Because I think when this first came out, no one really talked about it as much. And then, I think Fox TV helped that a lot with people like me who saw it in like 1995, 1996. So we can talk about that next week. So thank you for listening, and Brendan Fraser Week continues with Airheads next week.
Listen, all I know is if I was a caveman and I was dug up and I saw Pauly Shore, I would just tell them to put me back in the hole.